Hey, everybody, and welcome to another Deep Dive.
Yeah.
We love to bring you actionable insights and tips to boost your English fluency and all that good stuff.
Absolutely.
And today's topic is no exception. It's all about speaking English fluently and naturally.
Yes.
You guys shared some amazing material with us, and I'm so excited to unpack it with you, our expert, and see what we can find.
I'm excited too.
So to give everybody a little bit of context, we're going to be looking at tips for speaking English more fluently and naturally.
Right.
So what kind of jumps out at you as we sort of look at this material as a whole?
Well, you know what I think is really interesting is that so many people, they get caught up in this idea of like trying to sound like a perfect native speaker.
Right.
And I don't think that's really what fluency is about.
Yeah.
I think true fluency is more about just being able to communicate clearly and confidently.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
And, it's funny because one of the first things that the source talks about is this idea of thinking in English, which is something that, I find myself catching myself doing sometimes is translating.
Uh-huh.
And it's such a mental traffic jam.
It is. And especially when you're first learning English.
Right.
It's kind of a natural hurdle to have to go through that translation process.
Right.
But trying to translate word for word can really slow you down. The source that we're looking at actually suggests some really cool techniques to break free from that translation habit.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of like trying to visualize images that are associated with English words?
Oh.
So like, for example, if you see the word chair,
Yeah.
instead of trying to translate that word in your head,
Yeah.
you could picture like your favorite comfy armchair.
Interesting.
And that kind of creates like a more direct link between the word and the concept.
That's really cool. I like that.
Yeah.
I've never tried that.
Uh-huh.
But that makes a lot of sense because then it's not about the word. It's about
The meaning.
the meaning behind it.
Yeah.
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 I like that.
The source also mentions just like narrating your daily activities in English, even if it's just internally. So like, I'm making coffee,
Right.
or the sun is shining today.
Right.
Just kind of like simple things like that.
Yeah.
Describing those simple actions in English can help to kind of rewire your thinking patterns.
Wow. I love that. I love that idea of like just creating your own little English speaking world
Yeah.
in your mind as you go about your day.
Yeah.
That's great. I'm going to try that one. But what about grammar?
Okay.
Because, a lot of learners, myself included, we sometimes get a little bit tripped up
Mm-hmm.
about, worrying about making grammar mistakes.
Sure.
Does the source address that at all?
It absolutely does. And I think it actually makes a really good point, which is that grammar is obviously very essential for writing.
Yeah.
But when it comes to speaking, clarity and communication are really the most important things.
Yeah.
It really encourages you to not let that fear of making a little grammar mistake here or there
Right.
hold you back from actually speaking.
Oh, that's so freeing to hear.
Oh,
So how do we kind of like loosen up a little bit
right.
and just focus on getting our message across?
Well, one of the suggestions that this source makes is to pick a topic, any topic, like let's say your favorite hobby,
Uh-huh.
and just try to talk about it out loud for 1 full minute without stopping.
Okay.
Don't worry about the grammar. Don't overthink it.
Right.
Just let the words flow.
Okay. I could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to try that one. That sounds like a really good challenge.
Yeah.
Now, the source also mentions this technique of shadowing.
Yes.
Could you maybe explain a little bit about what shadowing is and why it's so effective?
Yeah. So shadowing is basically like having a conversation with your favorite English speaker.
Okay.
So you listen to a short audio clip like a podcast or an interview, and then you just try to mimic the speaker's rhythm, intonation, and even their pronunciation.
Interesting.
It's a really good way to kind of internalize those natural sounding patterns.
So it's about more than just like repeating the words. It's about...
It's about the music of the language.
Yeah.
The way that it flows.
Yeah.
The ups and downs.
I like that.
Yeah. And the source recommends starting with shorter clips and focusing on not just the words themselves,
Right.
but also the speaker's tone and pacing.
That's a really good tip.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I've tried shadowing before,
Mm-hmm.
but I think I was trying to do too much. I was like trying to do these long clips
Yeah.
and keep up, and it was a little bit overwhelming.
It can be.
So breaking it down into these smaller chunks,
Right.
I think will feel a lot more manageable.
Yeah, and as you get more comfortable, you can gradually increase the length
Yeah.
and complexity of the
Right.
audio.
Cool. Like that. Now, the source also talks about focusing on common phrases
Mm.
and how they're used in different situations.
Right.
Even keeping like a little notebook
Yeah.
of phrases that you hear native speakers using
Yeah.
and like movies or in podcasts or real-life conversations.
Exactly.
Like that. So creating kind of like your own personal phrase book,
Yep.
tailored to what you're interested in and the situations that you're most likely to find yourself in.
Exactly.
Cool. Does the source give any examples of any of these everyday phrases?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, like, for example, instead of saying it is raining heavily,
Right.
you could say it's pouring.
Okay.
Or instead of saying it is very easy,
Right.
you could say it's a piece of cake.
Right.
And these small changes can make your English sound much more natural and authentic.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that I always find a little bit tricky is those idioms,
Mm,
but they add so much personality and color to the language.
they do.
Yeah, I'm curious, does the source just focus on those shorter phrases?
Okay.
Or does it talk about building fluency when it comes to like longer strophes of speaking?
It definitely goes beyond just phrases.
Right.
One of the things that it emphasizes is that fluency isn't just about knowing the right words,
Right.
but it's about being able to weave those words together
Right.
into longer stretches of natural sounding speech. That makes sense.
Uh-huh.
But how do you go from mastering the individual phrases
Okay.
to being able to like hold a conversation
Right.
or give a presentation
Yeah.
without constantly like having to search for the right words?
Yeah, so the source makes a really great point about this. And it basically says that consistent speaking practice
Mm-hmm.
is key.
Okay.
It suggests making speaking a part of your daily routine,
Okay.
even if it's just for a few minutes at a time.
Okay.
What are some ways that you currently incorporate speaking practice into your day?
You know, I have to admit that I've been really inconsistent with that.
Uh-huh.
I tend to focus more on reading and listening.
Okay.
But this source is inspiring me to be a little bit more proactive about it.
Yeah.
And I do like that idea that you mentioned before of, just narrating my daily activities
Mm-hmm.
in English as I go. It's such a simple thing to do,
Yeah.
but I think it would make a big difference.
Yeah. And the source mentions some other techniques too, like reading aloud,
From a book or an article or even talking to yourself while you're doing chores.
talking to myself. My family's going to think I'm crazy.
Think of it as a private rehearsal.
Okay.
The source really emphasizes that it's not about sounding perfect.
Right.
It's just about getting comfortable with the act of speaking itself.
Yeah.
And it even suggests recording yourself and listening back,
Oh,
which can be really helpful
interesting.
for identifying areas where you might be stumbling or where your pronunciation could be a little bit clearer.
I've used voice recording for other things before. I never thought about applying it to language learning.
Yeah,
Have you found that that's helpful for you?
absolutely. It can be a little bit daunting to listen to yourself at first,
Yeah.
but it's incredibly valuable for
Yeah.
pinpointing those areas where you can improve.
So it's like having a personal language coach in your pocket.
Exactly.
I like that. So we've talked about practicing consistently,
Mm.
but what about real life conversation? I mean, that's where the rubber really meets the road, right?
It is.
Does the source offer any guidance on how we can get more of that conversational practice?
It definitely does. And it stresses that real life interaction is essential for building fluency and confidence.
Yeah.
And it suggests seeking out opportunities to engage with other English speakers,
Okay.
whether it's online or in person. Have you ever tried like language exchange apps or websites?
I've heard of them,
Yeah.
but I haven't taken the plunge yet.
Okay.
I think I get a little nervous about actually speaking with native speakers
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like my confidence isn't quite there yet.
Sure.
Does the source address that fear at all?
Yeah, it does. And it basically reminds us that everyone makes mistakes,
Yeah.
even native speakers.
Right.
It encourages us to kind of embrace those stumbles
Right.
as opportunities for growth,
Right.
rather than seeing them as like setbacks. Remember the goal is to communicate, not to be perfect.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we get so caught up in trying to sound perfect
Right.
that we forget that, it's really just about connecting with other people.
Exactly.
Right.
And the source offers some really practical tips
Cool.
for finding conversation partners. It mentions apps like HelloTalk and Tandem,
Yeah.
which can connect you with language learners from all over the world.
Cool. Those sound like great resources.
Yeah.
But what if you don't have access to those apps?
Okay.
Or you want to start with maybe something a little smaller?
Yeah, the source acknowledges that everyone has different learning styles and comfort levels,
Mm-hmm.
and it suggests starting with small steps, like, for example, striking up conversations with English-speaking strangers in everyday situations.
Okay.
So, like, something as simple as asking for directions or ordering a coffee
Right.
can be a great confidence booster.
I love that.
Yeah.
And it's such a good reminder that, It doesn't have to be this big, intimidating thing. It could
Right.
be
Yeah.
these little bite-sized pieces,
Ex
and those little interactions can really make a difference over time.
They really can. They expose you to authentic language in
Okay.
real-world contexts,
Hmm.
and they help you develop a more natural flow
Right.
in your speaking.
It's like those small steps we take in other areas of our lives,
Uh-huh.
right? Like they might seem insignificant at the time,
Right.
but over time they can lead to some pretty significant results.
Exactly. And speaking of small steps,
Yes.
the source suggests paying attention to a subtle but really powerful aspect of fluent speaking:
Okay. Pausing.
pausing.
I always thought that fluency was about like speaking quickly
Okay.
and smoothly without any hesitation.
Right.
So how can pausing actually enhance fluency?
It's a common misconception that fluency equals speed,
Okay.
but in reality, natural pauses between phrases and sentences
Right.
can actually make your speech much easier to understand and more enjoyable to listen to.
So it's more about like the rhythm and the flow of the language.
Exactly. Like the spaces between the notes in a piece of music.
Yes, I like that.
Yeah, and the source gives this really helpful example. Imagine saying, "I love traveling," and then putting a short pause after traveling,
Right.
and then continuing with "especially to the beach."
Okay.
That little pause just adds a more natural cadence
Yeah.
to your speech and helps the listener to process
Mm-hmm.
what you're saying.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
I never really consciously thought about pausing before,
Right.
but I can definitely see how it would make a difference.
It's one of those subtle details that native speakers do naturally,
Right.
but that language learners often overlook. And
Yeah.
it's such a simple technique that
Yeah.
you can start implementing right away.
Awesome. I am definitely going to be more mindful of my pauses
Great.
from now on.
The source also reminds us that we live in a really amazing time
Mm-hmm.
for language learning because we have access to so many amazing tools and resources.
Yeah.
Have you experimented with any language learning apps or websites?
I've dabbled in a few, but I'm always looking for recommendations.
Ah.
What does the source have to say?
Well, it specifically mentions Duolingo and Babbel,
Okay.
which are great for building vocabulary and practicing sentence structure.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing that the source really highlights is to use technology in a way that complements your learning style and goals.
So it's not just about like mindlessly clicking through an app.
Exactly.
Right.
It's about using it actively
Right.
to support your learning.
Cool. And I think the source also encourages us to think a little bit outside the box
Yes.
when it comes to using technology for language learning.
Mm-hmm.
Things like watching YouTube videos with subtitles,
Yes.
using speech-to-text tools to check your pronunciation,
Oh.
listening to podcasts or audiobooks in English.
Right.
Yeah,
So many
totally.
options out there.
So many options.
Ah.
I love the YouTube suggestion because there's such a wealth of content
Yes.
on YouTube, and you can really tailor it to your interests,
Absolutely.
whether it's, cooking, travel, technology,
Yeah.
anything.
It's a great way to expose yourself to different accents and speaking styles.
So it's like sneaking in a language lesson while you're enjoying your favorite hobby.
Exactly.
I like it.
Yeah.
And the more that you can integrate English into your daily life in enjoyable ways,
Mhm.
I think the more naturally fluent you'll become.
I agree.
So this has been such a great deep dive.
It has.
We've covered so much ground. We talked about, thinking in English. We talked about shadowing.
Uh-huh.
We talked about the power of pausing.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about using technology effectively.
Right.
But, fluency is not just about those external techniques.
Right.
It's also about our internal mindset.
It is, and that's something that the source really emphasizes as well.
Okay.
It talks about the importance of building confidence and believing in your ability
Right.
to become fluent.
And that's something that I think a lot of learners struggle with,
Mm-hmm.
including myself.
Sure.
That self-doubt,
Uh-huh.
that fear of making mistakes.
Yeah.
Does the source offer any guidance
It does.
on how to overcome those mental hurdles?
Yeah, it starts by reminding us to celebrate our successes,
Yeah.
no matter how small they might seem.
Yeah.
So did you manage to hold like a short conversation in English today?
Yes.
Did you learn a new phrase that you used correctly?
Right.
Give yourself credit for those achievements.
Yeah, that's so important. It's so easy to get bogged down
Right.
in like what we haven't mastered yet that we forget to look back
Yeah.
and acknowledge how far we've already come.
Exactly. And the source encourages us to try to shift our focus
Yeah.
from our perceived shortcomings to our growing strengths.
Right.
It also reminds us that making mistakes
Yeah.
is an essential part of the learning process.
Yeah. I think sometimes we forget that.
Yeah, and in fact, some language experts even argue that we learn more from our mistakes
Hmm.
than from our successes.
Interesting.
Yeah, it kind of takes the pressure off
Right.
of trying to be perfect all the time. And it allows us to embrace that learning journey with
Right.
all of its twists and turns.
And to view mistakes not as failures, but as feedback
Exactly.
that can help us to improve.
Right.
I love that. I think that's a really important point.
It is. And remember, every mistake is an opportunity to learn and to grow.
And that language learning is not really about reaching a destination.
Right.
It's about embracing that journey itself.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of rewards, what is one small action that you would recommend our listener take today
Okay.
to move closer to their fluency goals?
That's a great question. I would encourage the listener to choose one technique that we've talked about today that really resonates with them and commit to trying it out for a week.
Okay.
So it could be anything from narrating your daily activities in English to recording yourself speaking
Right.
to striking up a conversation with an English-speaking stranger,
Right.
whatever feels most attainable.
Right.
The key is to take action and experience the joy.
Of using the language in a new way.
That's a fantastic challenge. And I would add that it's important to be patient with yourself,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And to celebrate your progress along the way.
Yeah, fluency is not a destination. It's a journey. And every step you take brings you closer
Closer to the goal.
to your goal.
Wonderful. Well, with that inspiring thought,
That's-
we're going to wrap up part 1 of our deep dive.
Okay.
And we invite you to join us again soon for part 2,
Yes,
where we will continue to unlock your full English-speaking potential.
sounds great.
All right, we'll see you then. Welcome back to the deep dive.
It's great to be back.
So, in the last part, we were talking about how important it is to build confidence and, believe in your ability to become fluent.
Absolutely.
But, easier said than done sometimes, right?
It is. It can be challenging.
Yeah. Do you have any tips or tricks for kind of bolstering that confidence?
Well, one of the things that I found really helpful is keeping a fluency journal.
Oh, a fluency journal?
What's that?
Yeah, so it's basically just a notebook where you can track your progress and kind of stay motivated along the way.
Okay.
So, you could write down new phrases that you've learned,
Yeah.
mistakes that you've made and how you've corrected them,
Right.
goals that you want to achieve. You can even use it to kind of like jot down any interesting observations or
Yeah.
thoughts that you have about the language learning process.
That's really cool. So it's kind of like a way to become more aware of your own learning patterns.
Exactly. And it can also be a really great source of motivation
Yeah.
because you can look back and see how far you've come,
Right.
which can be really encouraging on those days when you're feeling a little bit discouraged.
And I imagine it also helps you to kind of identify maybe some areas where you need a little bit more practice.
Absolutely. It can definitely help you to pinpoint your strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to start a fluency journal today.
Yeah.
Now, one of the other things that the source mentions is the importance of having realistic expectations.
Yes. This is so crucial.
Yeah, because fluency is not something that happens overnight, right?
It's not. It's a journey.
Yeah, it takes time and it takes effort.
Right. And I think sometimes, especially in today's world with, all the instant gratification that we're surrounded by,
Yeah,
it's easy to get impatient
totally.
and to expect to see results immediately.
Totally.
But language learning is just not like that.
It's like anything else you want to get good at.
Right. It takes dedication.
Mm-hmm. And it takes consistency.
Exactly. And I think the source makes a really good point about comparing your progress to other learners.
Okay.
It's not helpful.
No, because everyone learns at their own pace.
Everyone learns at their own pace. Everybody has different strengths and weaknesses,
Right.
different learning styles, different backgrounds.
Totally.
So it's really important to focus on your own journey
Yeah.
and not to get caught up in comparing yourself to others.
And I think that's a really important point
Yeah.
because it's so easy to get discouraged when you see other people maybe progressing more quickly than you.
It is. And it can really sap your motivation.
Yeah.
So just remember, you're on your own path.
Yes. And you're exactly where you need to be.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah.
So what are some of the common mistakes that you see learners making that maybe they could avoid?
One of the biggest mistakes that I see is learners being afraid to make mistakes.
Okay.
They're so worried about sounding perfect
Right.
that they end up not speaking at all.
Right.
Which is a real shame because the only way to improve your fluency
Right.
is to actually practice speaking.
Make those mistakes and learn from them.
Exactly. Mistakes are your friend.
I like that. So embrace the mistakes.
Embrace the mistakes.
Another mistake that the source mentions is focusing too much on grammar.
Yes. We touched on this a little bit earlier,
Yeah.
but it's worth repeating.
Right.
Because grammar is important,
Right.
but it shouldn't be your primary focus when you're speaking.
So don't get bogged down in the rules.
Exactly. Just try to get your message across.
Now, one more thing that the source talks about that I thought was really interesting is this idea of finding your own voice.
Yes, this is so important.
So what does that mean exactly?
Well, it means developing your own unique style of speaking.
Okay.
It means not trying to sound like someone else,
Right.
but rather embracing your own personality and expressing yourself authentically.
Right.
You know, your voice is what makes you special.
Yeah.
And it's what will make your English sound natural and engaging.
It kind of goes back to what we were talking about before about not comparing yourself to other people
Absolutely.
because you have your own unique strengths
You do.
and your own unique way of expressing yourself.
Right.
And that's what's going to make your English stand out.
Exactly.
This has been such a great conversation.
It has.
I feel like we've really covered a lot of ground.
We have. We've talked about the importance of confidence and journaling, having realistic expectations,
Right.
embracing mistakes, and
Yeah.
finding your own voice.
So before we move on to part 3, is there anything else that you want to add?
I would just say to a listener that fluency is a journey. It's not a destination, and it's a
Yeah.
journey that's full of ups and downs,
Right.
but it's a journey that's ultimately incredibly rewarding.
Yes.
So just be patient with yourself, enjoy the process,
Yeah.
and never give up on your dream of speaking English fluently and naturally.
Well said. I love that. So with that inspiring thought,
Yes.
we're going to wrap up part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay.
We invite you to join us again soon for part 3,
Yes.
where we will continue to explore even more ways to unlock your full English speaking potential.
Sounds great.
Okay. All right. See you then.
All right, so welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into speaking English fluently and naturally.
Yes.
Now, in the last couple of parts, we've talked about a lot of different techniques and strategies.
We have.
And it all sounds amazing in theory.
Right.
But how do we actually put all of this into practice? Okay, well, one of the things that the source really emphasizes is this idea of setting realistic goals and breaking down those goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
Right, because if you try to do everything at once, it can be really overwhelming.
Exactly. So instead of saying, I want to be fluent in English,
Right.
which is a very broad goal.
Yeah, it's a big goal.
It is. You could set a smaller goal, like I want to be able to have a 5-minute conversation about my hobbies in English.
Okay.
Or I want to be able to understand an English language TV show without subtitles.
I like that. So it's something very specific.
Yes, something that you can actually measure your progress towards.
So it's like those SMART goals that we hear about in other areas of our lives.
Exactly. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
And when you break those goals down into smaller steps, it just feels less daunting
Yeah, and it makes it easier to stay motivated.
because you're seeing those little wins along the way.
Exactly. You're building momentum.
Right. Now, the source also talks about the importance of creating a supportive learning environment.
Yes, this is so crucial.
Yeah, because, if you're surrounded by people who are constantly criticizing you or making you feel bad about your mistakes,
Right.
it's going to be really hard to make progress.
Absolutely. So it's important to surround yourself with people who are supportive and encouraging.
So people who are going to lift you up.
Exactly. Who are going to
Yeah.
celebrate your successes with you.
Yeah.
And who are going to help you to learn from your mistakes.
And what if you don't have a lot of English speakers in your immediate environment?
Well, that's where technology can be really helpful.
Okay.
There are so many online communities and resources available now.
Right.
Where you can connect with other English learners and native speakers.
Like those language exchange apps that we talked about before?
Exactly. And also things like online forums and social media groups.
And even things like watching English language movies and TV shows.
Absolutely. Anything that exposes you to the language and gives you opportunities to practice.
Now, speaking of practice, how much practice is enough?
Well, that's a good question, and there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
But the source suggests aiming for at least 30 minutes of practice per day.
Okay.
And it emphasizes that consistency is more important than quantity.
So it's better to do a little bit every day.
Exactly, than to try to cram everything into one long session once a week.
And it also goes back to what we were talking about before about making it enjoyable.
Yes. If you're not enjoying the process,
Right.
you're not going to stick with it.
Totally. So find those activities that you actually look forward to.
Absolutely. Whether it's listening to music or watching movies or chatting with friends.
So one of the things that I'm curious about is motivation.
Okay.
Because, it's easy to get excited about learning English at first,
Right.
but then life happens,
Yes.
things get busy, and it can be hard to stay motivated.
It can. So how do we stay on track and keep that motivation going? Well, the source suggests setting clear goals, as we talked about before,
Right.
and having a strong reason why you want to learn English.
Right.
Because when you have a clear purpose,
Hmm.
it's easier to stay motivated.
Yeah, and to push through those challenges that you're inevitably going to encounter.
Exactly. It's also important to find ways to make the learning process enjoyable, as we've discussed.
Yes, because if it feels like a chore,
Right.
you're less likely to want to do it.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to reward yourself for your progress.
Oh, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So celebrate those milestones.
Exactly. Whether it's treating yourself to a nice meal, or buying yourself a new book, or taking a trip to an English-speaking country.
Awesome. So this has been such a fantastic deep dive.
It has.
We've covered so much ground.
We have.
But, at the end of the day, I think the most important thing is to just remember that fluency is attainable
Absolutely.
for anyone.
As long as you're willing to put in the time and the effort.
And to find joy in the process.
Exactly. So keep practicing, keep learning, and never give up on your dream of speaking English fluently and naturally.
Yeah.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes. Thank you for listening.
And we hope that you found these tips and insights to be helpful.
We hope so.
And remember, fluency is a journey,
It is.
not a destination.
Enjoy the ride.
Enjoy the ride.
Ah.
See you next time.